So it is my pleasure to introduce your highlight speaker for this evening at Melfort Toastmasters. Oh yes, Mr. Timer, Dan McCosh. I should give you some timing instructions, should I not? So Lynn, and correct me if I make a mistake here, your primary presentation, our target is 20 minutes for that presentation. So Dan, my recommendation is 15 minutes for green, 17 minutes for yellow, let's say 19 minutes for red, and then that way she'll know she's reached the 20 minutes. Following the primary presentation, we will also have a 10-minute Q&A. So for the Q&A, please, could we please have the green at 8, the yellow at 9, and the red at 10. So here to present her speech entitled Building Vibrant Volunteer Teams, please welcome, all the way from Manitoba, Lynn Silver.
Thank you very much, Mr. Toastmaster, fellow Toastmasters. It's a pleasure to be here. I've spent a good many years in Saskatchewan and love that province. So it's nice to be part of your meeting this evening. About 20 years ago, Toastmasters International unveiled a new resource for clubs. They called it the Moments of Truth. And the principle behind the program was that there were 6 identifiable points in a Toastmasters life when the club or the level, whatever level they were involved in, had an opportunity to make a really positive impression on that member or not. And I was working with volunteers at the time, and I was creating a lot of education for staff who worked for organizations who worked with volunteers. And I was trying to think of a way to sort of organize my commentary. And it occurred to me one night that this Moments of Truth format was perfect for volunteer management as well. So I tweaked it quite a bit, I grant you, but I did tweak it. As I did, though, I realized, because I was also a very active Toastmaster at the time, I realized that Toastmasters really are very similar to volunteers. In fact, it's fair to say, can't figure out where, okay. I should have practiced, Margaret. Screen share, there we go. In fact, it's fair to say that Toastmasters are volunteers disguised as members. Really, whether you're a sergeant-at-arms at Toastmasters Club or an area director or a division director, you are a volunteer. And sometimes the volunteers that we welcome within Toastmasters aren't really recognized the way they might be as volunteers in other organizations. And I think that Toastmasters is a wonderful organization. I've been a member for many years. The one thing I think we could improve is giving volunteers a little bit more of that recognition or giving members a little bit more of that recognition that they earn as volunteers. So I'm going to go over with you 6 points tonight where I think we have an opportunity to particularly engage and encourage our volunteers. And I would also suggest that the information we are going to share, as Keith said, is going to be information that'll be relevant within Toastmasters, but also in any of the interesting volunteer opportunities that you outlined during the introduction. So I hope this information is relevant. If you have questions, we will have a question and answer session at the end of my presentation. So in terms of first impressions within Toastmasters and outside of Toastmasters, we need to ensure that members who are volunteers or simply volunteers are expected by key leaders and are needed. So if we recruit a group of volunteers to support a particular event or activity, we need to make sure that the people leading that event, coordinating it, expect those members and those volunteers, and that those folks are needed. The last thing we want to do is to have volunteers who've given us their time arrive and find that, oh, I'm not needed. I didn't need to be here. We need to make sure that if a volunteer is a new Toastmaster member, they are partnered with an experienced volunteer and are introduced to other members. Toastmasters, as we all know, is all about connection. And so it's very important that we introduce people to each other. If volunteers have been recruited for a particular role or a particular activity, we need to confirm that the accoutrements of their role are ready, that what they need to do, what we need them to do is there. We need to confirm that the volunteer knows who the direct contact person is. Who do they be in touch with if something goes south? Sometimes that happens. So who do they contact if, I don't know, if they run out of staples or enrollment forms or any number of things? We need to make sure that they are thanked again by all the key leaders with whom they interact. So we want in Toastmasters to create literally an atmosphere and an environment of appreciation where people are thanked. Now, the other thing we need to have in mind is that the reality is that even thorough plans can go askew. It happens. We can plan all we like, but then we have trouble screen sharing or something goes awry. We need to explain to volunteers when that happens so that they understand that it wasn't because of carelessness or lack of planning. It was something that was beyond our control. In terms of member or volunteer orientation, we need to ensure that each volunteer receives a thorough briefing. That applies whether they're coming into a role as president or area director, or whether they're going to be on a committee to plan the district convention. We need to explain where supplies and resources are stored or are available. So if I'm a new VP of education and I'm told that there is a really good resource on the District 42 website, that's not enough. I need to be given the link so I don't have to look around for it and have trouble finding it. We need to give people as much help as we can so that they feel as supported as possible. If a particular tool, like a minute-by-minute schedule, which I think is unique to Toastmasters, I've never heard of anyone else using that schedule for a convention the way that Toastmasters does. But if a particular tool is being used, we need to explain the purpose and the value of the tool. If relevant, we need to welcome new members who are volunteering in various publications. So if there's a Toastmaster newsletter, or if there's a spot on the website, or if there's a chance to make an announcement, we need to welcome people to their volunteer role and to thank them as well. We need to discuss with each member any support they might need or want as a volunteer. They may be uncomfortable for whatever reason about a certain aspect of their role and need some particular support. And we need to clarify the volunteer's motivation. What benefit do they want from the experience for which they volunteered? I began working with volunteers in the late 1970s. It was different. Most women who were mothers were home during the day with time on their hands, and they were willing to help just for the sake of helping. Those years are gone, and I think really gone for the better. Now we have volunteers who expect their time will be well used and who expect that they will get something from it. Now, some of us are at an age where in Toastmasters where we aren't really so concerned about career development anymore. We're kind of past that. We're maybe retired or semi-retired, or at least as established as we want to be. But a number of Toastmasters are also in that wonderful career building stage. And sometimes that means that what they want is real good skill building opportunities that can transfer into their employment and into their career. So if we know those things, then we can support that and we can help them get what they want from the experience of volunteering. And if they get what they want from the experience of volunteering, they will do it again. In terms of inclusion and communication, it's really important that volunteers understand the value of their contribution to the organization's mission and goals. This is always important, but it becomes crucial if the activity is mundane or if there's less for the volunteer to do than expected. About 15 years ago, Winnipeg was experiencing a flu epidemic, essentially. And I was managing the volunteer program at the Manitoba Children's Museum at the Forts. We had a lot of young families visit, but we also had a lot of grandparents bringing grandchildren to the museum. And my executive director was very concerned about the potential for spreading flu in a place like a children's museum. So she asked me to recruit a team of volunteers whose sole responsibility for their 3-hour shift was to walk around the museum, wiping down every single frequent touch point. Now, does that not sound exciting to a 15-year-old? Whoopee! But you know what? When I explained why we needed them to do that, everyone was on board because they all had grandparents And they all understood that we don't want people to get the flu from coming to the Children's Museum. So if they understand what we need them to do and what the reason for it is, then we've solved the issue. The more information we share with volunteers and the more volunteers are aware of being acknowledged, informed, and included, the greater the likelihood that a sense of commitment will develop. If people know they're valued, they will in turn value the organization and value its mission and goals and become invaluable volunteers. It's important, I think, to solicit ideas and welcome creative solutions. Sometimes a new volunteer coming onto a committee or a team or a club executive will say, why do we do it this way? Could we not do it this way instead? And sometimes there's a reason why we do it the way we do it, but sometimes the reason why we do it the way we do it is simply because that's how we've always done it. And sometimes we need to listen to that person who has a new creative solution and we need to use it. If we honestly can't use it, we need to explain why, not just have it disappear into the ether, but to explain why in a particular situation it isn't going to work. We need to actively demonstrate that volunteers are crucial to our team. We need to take, as I said earlier, we need to take every opportunity we can to introduce volunteers to other members. And we need to be sure to include volunteer information and recognition, as I said, on the volunteers' website or on the organization's website. The only caution I would mention here is to check with volunteers before you put their names in public areas. Some people are private for very good reasons, and they don't want that kind of acknowledgement. So we need to check that always. In terms of planning and organization, we need to ensure that volunteer schedules and event information is shared regularly and early. So if you're forming the spring convention in District 42 team in November, and really all you're doing is recruiting at that point, that's fine. Give people as much information as you can. Let them know that it's preliminary information. It may evolve, but here's what you can tell them about the plan at this point. If a volunteer's shift is or an event is predicted to be particularly busy, like it, as in wear comfortable shoes, or particularly not busy, let volunteers know in advance. For example, if you've got a situation where you have volunteers sitting at a registration desk, let them know that the hours between 2 and 4 might be pretty quiet, just so that they know in advance. And if you introduce them to the people that they're working with, those groups can chat while they're not busy at the registration desk. Again, if volunteers belong to a team recruited for a particular project, ensure that they have everything they need provided, and ensure that volunteer shifts finish on time. If you can't guarantee that, let volunteers know so that they can plan accordingly. Whether a volunteer is 13 or 73, and I was guessing about the 73. I had a gentleman at the Children's Museum who I think was about 73. But regardless of what their age, they have additional commitments besides Toastmasters and the other organizations they might be involved in. And they need to be shown the respect of knowing that can expect to be finished on time. If a significant and sudden change is required, like we're going from in-person to online, let people who are volunteers know that right away. Let them know so that they can start thinking about how they're going to do their role so that it works best. And offer positive and specific feedback in person. It's gotten so easy to communicate electronically, but there's nothing like a hand clasp on a shoulder with an eye contact and a big thank you for someone's efforts to make them feel really acknowledged and very much appreciated. If you can't do that at all, at least send them an email in person as opposed to a group email thanking everybody kind of generically. That thank you, that positive feedback is really important. Volunteer team strength and retention. Of course, this is one of the things that Toastmasters is all about, but it's also something that's key in every organization. Keeping our volunteers and making them part of the team going forward is vital. It's really important. Recognize volunteer contributions at all events. Ask people to stand. Ask everyone in the convention audience who's a volunteer to stand just for a round of applause. Whatever you can do. Ask volunteers what form of thanks they would most appreciate and give them that. feedback from volunteers generally is that regular informal expressions of appreciation are most valued. Consider offering events exclusive to volunteers. At the Children's Museum, every 6 weeks, I issued an invitation to all the volunteers to come to the museum after hours to bring a family member or a friend. I brought pizza, salad, and pop in, and they had the opportunity to play in the museum. And whatever age that volunteer was, they had a blast. They had a really good time. So sometimes offering events or things that are exclusive to only volunteers is really powerful too, because it lets them know that they really are that special and that important. On the other hand, I remember a situation a number of years ago. Actually, it was in the late 80s. My husband and I were living in Moose Jaw, Saskatchewan, and I was working with the Regina Humane Society in Regina. And I had a number of volunteers who also volunteered at one of the Regina hospitals. And they came in to volunteer one day. They used to always volunteer together. And they were absolutely incensed. They had been asking a hospital for a little bit of money every once in a while so that they could have, a movie night for the kids and have some snacks and some treats. And they were always told, no, we just don't have we don't have a budget for that. There's no money for that. We can't possibly do that. Then the end of the year came, and it was volunteer week across the country. And all of a sudden, the money was found to have a gala banquet in honor of the volunteers. Volunteers did not attend in droves because they were so frustrated that the thing that they wanted and had asked for, they hadn't gotten, when all of a sudden there was money for a dinner in honor of the volunteers. So we need to remember that volunteers are committed to the organization. And if they see us, using our resources in ways that don't make sense, that can cause problems as well. Whenever possible, in fact, explain decisions to volunteers. This is especially important if the decision is a difficult one, like, sorry, we said no about popcorn all year and now we're having a gala, but this is why. This is why it's important to do. This is why we're doing it this way. I hope you understand. Volunteers are more prepared to accept a decision if they understand the reason. They may not like the decision, but they'll accept it if they understand what the reason is. There's something else we need to remember, and I think this is vitally important, especially in communities in provinces like Manitoba and Saskatchewan, where we have lots of small towns and lots of small communities where people know each other. Volunteers represent the organization of Toastmasters to potential members and supporters within their own communities too. They don't just represent Toastmasters within Toastmasters. They represent it to their children's friends, to their children's teachers, to their colleagues at work, to their neighbors. So if we have members who are volunteers in Toastmasters, or if we have volunteers in any organization and they're getting acknowledged and valued within the organization, they will be the most effective volunteers on our ambassadors on our behalf. It's very important to remember that, I think. Achievement and contribution recognition. Toastmasters is pretty good, I think, at recognizing area directors and outgoing club presidents and division directors and district directors. Sorry, I stumbled a little bit because in my days it was area governors and district governors, so the new titles for me. We tend to recognize those folks very well, I think, overall, but we need to remember to recognize everybody. And I think that's really important because we need people to commit to Toastmasters. We need people to be prepared to take on challenges and new roles and to grow. And if we're going to have them do that, we need to make sure that we recognize them. However you can do it in reports, in publicity, and at meetings, recognize and celebrate members' volunteer contributions. It's really important, and it can't really be done too much. Acknowledge contributions and successes promptly. As I said, if someone just completed a pathway, don't wait till next month to recognize that. Recognize it right away. Respond fairly when volunteers need flexibility. And sometimes that just life happens. Toastmasters is not the first priority in everyone's life. If we're lucky, it's the second, but sometimes it's the fourth or fifth. So we need to be aware that sometimes people will just not be able to do what we wanted them to do. That's really important to remember. I know at the Children's Museum, I used to find that once people hit 18 and finished high school and went on to university, they were not as reliably available as they had been when they were 13. Imagine that. Why would that be? So I found that if I rolled with their punches and if I sort of found things for them to do when they could do them, it worked a lot better. It was a lot more satisfying for them and for me. Strive to capture and recognize behind the scenes contributions. Sometimes the member who's not on the executive, but is always there a few minutes early and sets the room, at least when we could set up a room, sets up the rooms so that it's begun even before the Sergeant at Arms arrives. That behind the scenes contribution is very important as well. Create a broad, not narrow definition of achievement and contribution. Like I said, people may not be going in the direction that's typical in Toastmasters. They may have something else that they need to get from Toastmasters. So we need to help them get that, as well as help them meet the sort of expected goals within Toastmasters. And, you know, ask what acknowledgement volunteers prefer, and if at all possible, offer that. The first time I was an area governor, the district governor asked me how I wanted to be thanked. I was in a new job. And I said, could you write a letter to my executive director telling them how terrific I've been all year? And she said, I could do that. And she did that. And that went in my file. So I was 32 at the time, maybe, and I was still building a career, and it was really important to me. So ask what what acknowledgement volunteers want. And if at all possible, give them that. That's the end of my presentation. I again thank you for your attention. I thank you, and I must say I find it remarkably interesting that this small group, I think there are 10 of us or 9 of us, have such diverse interests outside of Toastmasters. It's really exciting to hear all the things that you have done and continue to do as volunteers. Margaret, you are the only volunteer firefighter I know. So good for you. And I hope we don't get any more hail this year. I'll keep my fingers crossed that no more hail arrives. Anyway, we have time for questions, I think. So if anyone has any questions, please just ask. Or comments as well.
I believe Dan McCosh has a question.
Really appreciate your presentation. I think the emphasis, if I have a weakness, is on recognition, because I'm always saying, okay, guys, let's go on to the next thing. I have to, so you gave me lots of things to think about it. I have read the 5 love languages, so I know that, and anybody that hasn't should, because it tells you not only for your wife or significant other, but for anybody that there's different ways to recognize people. And sometimes you don't even have to ask them, you just know. My question is, I'm the program quality director for District 99, Northern Alberta and Northern Saskatchewan. And we've had 2 years of, to spare with pandemic. And it's not only us, it's across the whole Toastmasters network, but that's fine. How do we recover? And one of the things that I'm noticing, like, people aren't stepping up to do things. We've got a lot of clubs that are sort of struggling, or even suspended. And how do you, I'd like to know what recommendations you have. I've got some ideas, but what do you think? How do we get people engaged? That seems to me, that's the word I got for this year. How do we get people out of their seats and saying, look, there's great things you can do? Or is that the answer?
That is a question that I think a lot of Toastmasters clubs are going to be dealing with, because we've gotten kind of into this little habit of cutting some corners in some ways, maybe because it's COVID and we're not meeting in person and it feels kind of strange. I'm not sure what the best way of engaging people is, but I think the thing we need to remember to do is have some fun. So maybe try a meeting when nobody comes with a roll and everybody takes, a number from a hat. Well, I guess you could do a number from a hat if you were doing it virtually, but just picks a number from air, and that's the roll. You'd want to have a Toastmaster, obviously, but all of the other rules, like we saw how Keith did it tonight. We had some gaps in the agenda, and he filled them. So, sometimes I think we take ourselves a little bit too seriously. It's not the end of the world if people don't engage, but you're right. if it becomes a habit of being disengaged, then that's not positive for those members or for the organization overall. So I would just suggest make sure that you do something that's fun. One of the clubs I belong to, BLT, actually is having our year-end celebration on Saturday, and it's hats off to you, and we've all been asked to wear a hat. So goofy things like that, yeah, goofy things are really important. Life is serious, and right now with the economy the way it is and politics the way they are, there's lots to be concerned about. And sometimes that means that signing up for a role is something that people are loath to do because they're not sure what life is going to be like 2 weeks from Tuesday. So they don't want to make a commitment in case they can't meet it. So make sure, I guess, I would say also, in addition to having some fun, make sure that we don't kind of get on people's cases about it. I think we can accept that everyone's doing the best they can in this difficult situation, but it's going to be a challenge for the next little while, especially since some people aren't really comfortable being in person yet. Really, that's another issue, I think. Anyone have any ideas? That's a very good question that Dan has raised. Anyone have any thoughts?
Actually, I do have a question that ties into Dan's question.
Okay.
My very first volunteer engagement in university, I presented myself to the U of C Volunteer Center and I said, I want to volunteer, give me a job. So they had me doing data entry. And I did not last very long in data entry. We know how important data entry is, but as a volunteer, that did not exactly capture my imagination, and I quit shortly thereafter. So my question tied to engagement is, how can you recruit volunteers to do jobs that may not necessarily be fun?
Well, wiping down touch points in the Children's Museum wasn't much fun either, but it was important. So I think if volunteers know why what we're doing, what we're asking them to do is important, that's half the battle. And so if we say, our Toastmasters meetings function better for all of our members if the positions on the executive or the positions on the agenda are taken, and if people are actively making speeches, it's better for the whole club. I know you're busy. I know there's lots of balls you're keeping in the air, but if I could schedule you for a speech next month, can we pick a week and do it then? So that acknowledge the realities of their life. Life is complicated, so acknowledge that first of all. Ask them what they want to do. Like maybe they don't really feel like making a pathway speech right now because they're just not in the right headspace, but they've got a terrific idea for table topics. So, okay, they'll do table topics, and then you can remind them about the speech at some point in the future. But I think the key is to ask what people want or can do. I'm surprised that they dumped you into that's not the right word, I apologize, but I'm surprised that they started you off with data entry, because usually when someone volunteers, it's because they want to make connections with people, and it's hard to do that if you're sitting in front of a computer by yourself entering data. So I guess to summarize both Dan's question and Keith's comment is, I think it's important to make it as much fun as possible, make it non-threatening, like, not that we're going to get heavy-handed, and ask people what they want to do and what they feel they can do. And if they don't feel they can make a pathway speech, just ask them when they think they can. Not pin them down exactly, but encourage them to make a decision, because most of us, once we've made a decision, we'll stick to it.
Finding what people want to do is so critical. We put on, the first time in a long time, many moons ago, put on a TLI in Edmonton. And I said, and I was organizing it as a high performance leadership. I said, I want 35 presenters and we're going to get 300 people out. And some people on the team said, oh, Dan, you're crazy. But I kept that really high objective. And I did get 35 presenters, not by going around and saying, Tracy, I need you to do this. Laurel, how about doing something on that? I went out and talked to people and said, what do you like to do? What are you passionate about? And they all came and did 40, 50-minute presentations about what they were good at, what they knew about. It was really successful.
Great.
So I keep my ears open all the time, and I won't tell stories out of school here, but last night I was at something and somebody said something. I said, yes, we could use somebody doing that.
Yeah,
it's not really even on my list of people I need, but it's something they'll do and they'll do well.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, witness our introductions once again tonight. Look at how many interesting things there were there. Interesting speech topics. It was an interesting introduction. It could evolve into an interesting table topic session. And it's just people's interests. We all have our own, and because we're all unique individuals, we bring our own interests to the table, virtually or otherwise.
I think we have time for 2 more questions.
Not a question, but a comment. I think the sooner that we can meet in person again will help to revive club memberships. Because it's too easy, well, with Zoom, there's always idiosyncrasies, or maybe it's the idiot behind the screen that's the idiosyncrasy. But anyway, there's always stuff that doesn't work well, and it's definitely not personal. So the more it's the personal interaction, the laughter around the table, sharing jokes, a muffin, whatever, that's important. The social aspect, and there's really no social aspect with Zoom.
It's hard to be social with Zoom. I agree. And I agree with you also about the personal aspect. I need to make a confession. I first joined Toastmasters in 1981. I was living in Swan River, Manitoba, which is north of Dauphin, it's north of the Interlake, it's north. And I wasn't meeting anybody except the daycare parents. So I was looking for something to do where there weren't going to be preschoolers. And I was assured that preschoolers didn't come to Toastmasters. So that's why I joined, because it was just for grown-ups. And it was only after I'd been a member for a couple of weeks that I realized what the potential was. But the personal contact is really important. Being in touch with people who you share something with is vitally important to all of us. And I think you're right. We need to get back to that as soon as we safely and comfortably can, because it is just not the same. One of the clubs I belong to here in Manitoba has an unofficial social group after the meeting. We finish the meeting at 1 on Wednesdays, and we invite people if they can to stay for a few minutes and just chat. And often about 5 or 6 of us do that. And it's not as good as being face-to-face, I grant you, but it's better than nothing. So heaven help us. I hope we'll get back to being face-to-face soon.
I was at a meeting yesterday. I wouldn't be too quick to say whether people want to get off this or not. First of all, we've had a lot of members join in a virtual environment, and they're not really that comfortable going back to face-to-face. But I was at a meeting, it was actually in Ireland, and the motion was they were going to stay on the internet. Somebody said, if you stay on the internet, I might quit because I want to go face-to-face. And somebody said, if we go so the guy said, well, we'll go look at hybrid then. Somebody else said, if we go hybrid, I'm quitting. So I think you really need to talk to your group, see what sort of works, how to meet everybody's needs, and work from there.
Yeah, that's a good
Real
point.
education to hear that discussion.
Yeah. Well, there is a reality. We live on the prairies, and I mean, let's face it. If you have to drive into town from the farm, for example, for a Toastmasters meeting, it's storming, you're going to miss that meeting. But if you can go online, you can still go to the meeting. So I think maybe a lot of things we do, including Toastmasters, are going to be changed going forward, even when we can meet in person again. Anyway, I see the red light. So Dan, thank you very much. It's been a pleasure to meet all of you. Thank you very much for your time this evening.
Thank you.
Lynn, thank you for that amazing presentation. When I first saw you presented at BLT, I was impressed. And tonight, in the company of these other leaders and communicators, I am doubly impressed. And it was a tremendous amount of information that you shared. We will be sharing this recording off the Melfort Toastmasters website. And I specifically want to invite Dan and you and other district leaders, please make the most of this resource, because I think this has been a fantastic educational framing how volunteering, we as leaders of Toastmasters, we are also volunteers, but what we learn in Toastmasters also extends beyond the club district level.
So Lynn, are you okay if we put this on the district site under resources?
Sure.
Okay.
Perfect. Now, before we move to our second speaker, Margaret, I'm going to ask if I can take a screenshot of everybody here. So I'm going to stop the recording.